Okie dokie. Got my sparkling water. Ready for the last chapter. I know I am. It's gonna be awesome. It's a long one. This is a long one. If you haven't already, go check out the character introductions where we go in depth with kind of what's gonna be going on today. And let's buckle up and get right into it, right? Okay. Curiosis Amor. It took many days of rest for them to return to their normal health. The amount of energy used and the sheer force afflicted on each other had tired them all greatly. Jim tended to her garden and did some simple things, even allowing Informe to lurk freely, and interestingly, it loves to change and morph with ease to frolic in the garden's innocence as either a ferret or a cuddly kitten. Jim worked hard still in her books and read many of them at once. Through the garden, she would frequently plant morning glories and seeds of her own design, including a giant Luna Rose hibiscus that shed gorgeous lime green and pink particles. Her garden was vast in the mansion's tall and eccentric ceilings of the garden room. The soil was stained a dark black and brown soil with insects of her own creation. The garden was a collection of many of what Mother and Father would write about, rare and exciting species of plants. It was always interesting to me that Jim had such a care for gardening, when she was capable of such great or destructive things. I think there is a sliver of light still trying to claw away the shadow's grip. One that has always interesting was her ability to create a sigil of foreign nature to even herself. Books not even coming close to describing what type of sigil lays engraved, no, burnt into our kyanite castle home. Yet would take the time to grow and explore the complexity of organic and non-organic alchemy. The garden was a holy place that emanated healing energy and great abundance with a factor of rapid growth germination. Recently, she has created this chalice in her findings and experiments. The magic chalice she now holds in her palm as a resource of even more eminent power, while also doubling as an overflow channel for her built-up energy. It holds more questions to me than anything, to be honest. The item oozes this black and purple viscous liquid that never stops overflowing the cup. Informe truly spends her time in play with Jim. The two almost have found time to enjoy the smells of time's presence and find some peace. The alarming part of their newfound peace is that they seem to truly enjoy it. I love being able to see her in such high spirits even after many cycles of hardened training. Alita started to pick up a hobby growing a special type of rosa in the courtyard in front of the mansion where we still await the sun's grace to grow over the wreckage with newly grown plants. They have started to even bloom more full since her presence in the now somewhat beautiful courtyard. The area around each pillar, the remaining ones, after the catastrophic fight, are now covered in these gorgeous native flower that blooms large green petals and a viney stem that grips and strengthens the material it latches onto. However, these flowers were filled with Alita's auric glow. Truly a remarkable sight at night, and seems to keep the creatures at bay for now. I enjoy spending my time meditating with my sword and learning to control my inner self, and seek to reach this transformation that Jim speaks so highly of. Passively training during the weekday's peak, I don't necessarily spend that time physically training, rather I spend that time training my mind. During the morning routine, I have now started breathing techniques that Jim showed me to help with this ascension and transformation. She makes special magical clay gourds for him to breathe, And with his breath alone, putting the tip of the gourd to his lips, he strengthens his breaths to try and break the clay container. Successfully doing this, she will then make another one, but changes the size to help increasing his strength. Jim reassures me that when the time is right, transformation will happen, but has for now, for the time being, called off skirmish training. She says that she is planning to actually be leaving for a couple cycles to journey to the Great Northern Mountains that she's been studying for some time now. Whenever I would read about these mountains of the Great Northern Barrier, it seemed to my parents to be more of a fictitious land ruled by higher beings. She wants to travel for alchemic reasons that will help her along her research for medicines, mythic spells, and ultimately finding materials for the retrieval of her demon blood that she wants so badly. They have been packed and ready for a couple of days, just taking their time prepping for their long journey. Jim's maps that she is utilizing for my parents' own ventures plots a vigorous journey over 3,000 miles for a one-way trip. Jim's eyes are truly set for her own ideals and desires, but is starting to find patience in her endeavors. One morning, Jim gave her garden one more once-over and had Informe turn into her devilish self and started packing her stuff in a special saddle that she made just for her. She couldn't fly there because of much larger animals that rule the higher atmospheres and the numerous amounts of parasites that live just to eat any low-flying creature. Tightening some straps from below Informe's waist, she looks up at Alita and myself with a faint smile with her eyes covered by the large hooded cloak. All three of us stood in the silence, but her and I knew what was really being said. Be safe, come back alive. But no one could manage those words, not for a sense of manifesting something bad happening, but because we just simply do not show love like that to each other. Our love is a special kind of sense of awareness that we both know who we are to each other and where we come from. We would do anything to protect each other and certainly never let anything come between us, not even the end of this infernal universe. She left through the big doors, and with her absence, the sounds of the doors closing as her image became smaller echoed through the now quiet mansion. Alita and I headed to the kitchen, and for once walking down that hallway didn't seem so grim. It was more of an exciting moment that I wanted to share with Alita. I grabbed her hand and rushed her into the kitchen to start a brunch for us to enjoy in the garden room's gazebo. Her always blank and sweet expressions were always so subtle and cute to me. Alita's hands were so soft yet so powerful that sometimes I forgot that she was my protector. Even though she was rough and tough, she cooked as gentle and kind as you could imagine. We cooked, we smiled, and even laughed while eating out in the beautiful green-filled and grass-covered room. The smells of many teas that we enjoyed and the warm sensation of the conversations we had were immaculate. Truly a day to remember for us. After brunch, we had gone for a much-needed walk throughout the house. We enjoyed strolling the long, untraveled regions of the mansion and looking at all my father's massive art pieces. He was a complexy man, and even though I only knew him through his pen, I can sometimes feel him smiling down on me. Alita shared my sympathy for my parents and actually enjoyed studying in their library. The library was a massive room that was 3 stories high, and every story is more packed with books than the next one, and on the base levels, where the entry was, to the massive font of knowledge. Every single book in the library was written by only 2 authors, my parents. Over the time in this schooling prison, Jim and I have sorted through the halls of the library and the leveling floors and challenging ladder reaches of many books. The center of the library was light-struck tables with candles made to never stop burning their flame. They hover over the tables, and once a reader sits, the candle with them always keeps your way lit through the library until you leave. Truly a kind and special type of alchemy that I absolutely love. Alita finds her comfort in the massive assortment of permaculture that my mother had mostly written. After our leisurely walk, we found that the evening had fallen in our careless day around the house and found ourselves prepping to go to bed. Jem's journey so far. Jem was clearing through the large forest that surrounded the house and came to the realization that she was clearing past lands that she knew most, hoping that the chalice would help her sustain her overflowing mana energy. Anything further was going to be unknown, and only read about the lands in Mom and Dad's books. Every step that came forth would be an unknown step. She believed in her voyage and had trusted her studying in the lands of this planet, but she doubted the true nature of the Great Northern Mountains because of its unknown nature. The so-called angel of those lands could possibly be an artifact for praise or even a person of an unknown origin. She contemplated what this angel would even look like, and if it was truly even real, but had to focus in the present for the time being. The forest that she had cleared was riddled with creatures that wouldn't even come close to matching with Informe, or even herself. Most of them had come to the understanding that there was a power amongst them that was overly powerful. Jem's prowess was incredibly powerful and even fatal to some life forms that would stand too close. The ground below her would become void of life if too weak to withstand its draw. The shadow affected her in the most unnatural ways, even to the point of indirect contact. The clearing outside the forest was barren and smoking from molten earth from deep within the planet, oozing on the surface and creating new grades of land. The mountains that smoldered black smoke had a consistent spark of inclement weather that was surrounded by powerful storms of glass and shards of hardened soil. The steeps were not a place to be, nor a place to travel over their journey, but was going to persist with the improbable. Jem and Informe were both entitled to be out of place within the first leg of their journey because neither of them has ever come close to leaving the comfort of the mansion, let alone past the perimeter of the clearing. Informe and I tightened our grip on our situation and slowly made haste into the unknown, dusty fields of misery. Craters of falling landmasses fell from great explosions of the many mountain volcanoes and creating new pathways across a land of fire that eventually led to a massive tree line of lush tropical forest after many days of non-stop traveling. The soil became much more sandy and full of life, with great vines encircling trees that were not like the ones that surrounded the mansion. They stopped to recoup themselves and soak in the fact that they have been in the midst of a volcanic ash for too long. They found refuge along the rocks of a beautiful waterfall that resembled an opening to a larger water system that went into the ground. The exposed aquifer provided plentiful coverage from the sounds of the jungle that they were residing in. The animals were foreign to them, but did not mind their presence and actually found them interesting. Informe frolicked amongst a group of small, large-eared quadrupeds with large eyes and small legs. The animals were orange, black, and white with long tails used to grab the vines that surrounded the well of the well-being. She would change into a form of them, and they would examine her until she would change into another form she would see in the trees, taking flight as one of the long-necked bird doing circles around the well to expel some of her energy. After a day of rest and play, we left the refuge and climbed the large opening to the aquifer, all while the animals almost showed us out on the safe passage. The passage led to a thick foliage that was covered by a thick canopies above. The animals watched us leave, giving us a goodbye. For a while, I actually enjoyed their company, and even would join in on their play in the large bodies of water. Informe stood for a while, with me mounted, checking over straps and supplies we replenished in the garden of ordnance, and looked at them respecting their goodbye with a great roar and show of her teeth sent them running back. After many hours, we started to head up a large incline with clouds rolling in. We quickly made it to the top and saw a vast land. and in the far distance saw a large and long structure just outside a tree line. Amongst the tree line was a massive wall that extended well beyond the eye's reach in every direction, obviously keeping what could even survive these terrains would never enter the boundaries of the border. The mountain that Informe and I was patiently climbing over gave a better sight over the distance to the wall. As she was making her way through the rugged mountain, she soon realized that there was a fight along the border of the wall that involved some fire-breathing creatures and beings on the other side defending their post. The creatures would crawl on all six and stood 9 meters tall with a tail of pure earth that would fling a cascade of sparking ground that incinerates anything it comes into contact with. The sky lit with a bombardment of flashes and falling debris, with a counter to its destructive influence of sudden bursts of blue spheres preventing the forest from the burning flames behind the wall. The wall was tall and had large gates at the opening with many men standing their ground against the terror creatures that beckoned them coming from the large openings in the ground. We sat well into the night watching what seemed to be an endless fight, waiting for our chance to get through without getting involved, but the fight never seemed to falter. She took a deep breath after daybreak, with the creatures still swarming the men, and gave Informe a pet alongside her mane, and whispered very softly, "Informe." Unmounting her by levitating upwards, Informe assumed a ferocious form prepared for pure warfare, with her eyes set on the battle ahead. The masses of creatures had no knowledge of their soon-to-be demise and doom. Informe was prepped and ready for action, with her form continuing to take shape as she arose. She drew massive amounts of overpoured energy from Jem. While both of them stood well upon a high perch of the mountain, peered below the legions of nature's furious beings, Jem's arm rose and held steady, awaiting Informe's obedience. Kill. Informe gave no hesitation, and with this powerful sudden jump, she bolted with a massive wave of force to follow into the air for an aerial attack. Mid-air, she finished her transformation into a multi-eyed peregrine falcon, reaching speeds beyond any falling space debris or comet alike. The men that were lined on the edge of the gate saw the plummeting light and made way inside, leaving the masses of creatures exposed. Her impact was dead-centered in the masses of creatures that preyed upon the people of the wall, still falling into the moat, trying to make their way to the short bridge made of massive wood structures. The impact was so intense that the light came from the friction cast a shadow behind Jem. Jem smiled below her hooded cloak, knowing what had become of the mass of lower life forms. She brushed off the dirt and rocks that flung from the impact wave and started her way to the crater that was once flat ground. The beams that protected the wall were out of sight of her gaze, assuming it was from a display of power of the unknown life. Jem's sight was seeking to find Informe in her wellness, and not obliterated by her own attack. Her creation was capable of great and powerful attacks of that even a demon would have difficulty defending without sacrificing their entirety, but still she had her limits. The masses that weren't killed within the many suns' blast were either running or crawling into the mysterious holes that their legions were being born from. The rest had been instantly turned into a bust of ash that remained in animation. They were destroyed so quickly that their bodies were like living examples of their own anguish. Informe was at the bottom of the crater, slowly making her way up from the fuming clouds and ember-rich earth below her back to Jem. She nuzzled up against Jem for recognition of her accomplishment, yet heard something coming from below her. She assumed a form much like herself, but with wings, nudging Jem to mount her at once. Jem pat her mane, smirking, and commanded her to get up to the sky for a counterattack, just in case there were others watching that may want to third-party her now known position. The ground rumbled furiously, and out came a giant rockworm. Rockworms were furious beings that ate rock and typically were unable to be taught or tamed, yet this one was clearly had to be trained to create dynamic tunnels to its owner's choosing. Jim dashed to the side, preparing her staff for a protective sigil to await what the worm had in store. It moved towards the wall as if not to even see or care for her existence. She cast an obliterate spell towards the rampaging beast, and because of its armored skin, it deflected the inferno, hitting the ground, sending dirt flying in the air. Jim watched in amazement of the speed of the large beast, and suddenly a burst of blue light filled the sky, followed by a giant explosion from within the beast, sending pieces of its insides every which direction, leaving nothing but a bloody mess along the side of the wall and surrounding area. At one of the gate's entrances stood a mage already casting a mending spell where the worm crawled through, covering the potential threat that may follow through the tunnel. The mage looked incredibly powerful with armor of silver shimmer and steel, but not even fazed by Jim being present. He teleported directly in front of her, sending another flash of blue light. She covered her face with a sash covering and motioned the smoke out of the way to get a better look at the mage now standing not even 10 meters from her. She kept still, just to keep a sense of fragility to the newly found stranger, and to see if he noticed Informe in the upper atmosphere yet. The mage spoke. "And who are you, stranger? I have never seen anyone from the Badlands except Nagari shaman and the like." Raising his wand to her, she moved her sash and exposed her face to the stranger. "Oh, ma'am, forgive my brute nature. We typically don't get women of your stature around these parts," he said, lowering his wand. "I did not mean to offend, but I do have to ask why you are here, and ask what business you have with the gates of Netheria." Jim commanded Informe to calmly land and assume herself back onto her finger in case the mage tried to start a fight. Informe free fell to a graceful landing and walked up behind her, turning back into a ring on her finger. The mage stood vigilant, but didn't seem to be threatened by Informe whatsoever, and stood waiting his answer. "I'm traveling from the forest beyond the Badlands and seeking the great northern mountains. I seek an angel of great power of the land." She slowly lowered her cloak, causing her braid to fall to her side, hoping that the stranger would know some helpful information. The mage took the hood down of his metallic armor, conformed with a royal blue and gold glare revealing his figure. His smile was friendly, yet his figure was aggressive and rugged, probably from the constant battles he must wage against from the revolting creatures from the area. "Oh, well, you are certainly in the right place, but that's another 1,000 miles journey beyond these walls, and I cannot allow a stranger to freely find herself a resident of Netheria walking about without telling me her purpose here. Not only that, you just cast a magic that could devastate these lands, and at no cost to your health or well-being." He stood now even more careful of Jim. "So I ask you again, what's your business here?" This time he removed a large shield-sized spell book from his back and started drawing power from it in preparation for battle. "Now that would be a silly idea to start a fight with me, especially since I'm just seeking refuge and safety from my long journey. Don't you think so?" Jim said, smiling greatly, hoping that she wouldn't have to pick a fight with an experienced mage, while also prepping her staff behind her back in case he tried to anything slick. He quickly held his wand up, glowing blue, with his eyes glowed a gorgeous baby blue, encircled with alchemy. "Ma'am, I will have to ask you to stop charging your staff behind your back immediately, or I will act with the authority of the High Kings of Netheria if I need." Jim raised her hands quickly, with the same innocent smile, and said, "Absolutely, absolutely. You got me. I am simply here to get through the gates and find my way to the great northern mountains for my alchemic education and teachings. It took the mage a moment to believe her, and then lowered his hands, discharging the built-up arcade into the mountains behind her with a great display of power. As they stood there, Informe quickly came out as a small kitten and rested on Jim's shoulders to present even less of a threat. Then, suddenly, a massive rumble besieged the ground, with another massive wave of creatures making their way to them out of the distance. Do you think we can talk about this inside? Said Jim, hoping he would take the bait and let them in. He stood there, almost purposely taking his time to think. Yes, that would be a fine idea. Take my hand, milady. Jim has never, not even once in her life, felt a need to blush, and suddenly her face was teeming with feelings that she has never felt. She slowly held her hand out, and he took it to pull in her close to his chestplate and teleported them to the giant gates of Netheria. With a massive thud and sounds of moving gears, the gates began to open with a loud announcement of his entrance. Why can't we just teleport behind the gates? She asked, still shaken by him asking for her hand. The walls of Netheria are specially built that negate all magic and trespassing, he said, with his glowing baby blue eyes still fixed on the gate opening. He took her in the long hall that led to the other side of the wall, and as her eyes adjusted to the sun's, she was amazed by the towns and the land of Netheria already. They stretched beyond the rolling hills and even further yet, surrounded by giant trees. Soldiers came rushing by them to reinforce the walls from above and resume their small break from the creatures trying to make their way in. They were armored to the teeth with some of the finest metals, with large war spears and shields to match their suits of armors, commanded by mages of minor power riding great, tall, tamed tiger beasts of the area. Along the road they were walking down, she was escorted to a tavern that served outsiders food and gave them a place to stay for a short period of time while they became a resident of Netheria. Informe was loving the attention that the mage was giving her, and truly, so was Jim. Jim was nervous coming into the well-lit tavern with a large opening dining area, with a large fireplace to match its stone decor lined with antlers of old. She will be staying here for the next fortnight or two, and her familiar companion under my and only my supervision. I will be here in the morning to escort her. Is that understood? Anyone else will have to answer to the High Court for treason, he said in a much more serious tone than before, noticing the CA engraved on one of his armored shoulders with gold trim. Jim really didn't want to have or desire to stay here, but she enjoyed the thought of a bed to sleep in and nice food to eat since they had been traveling so long already. The mage, who still didn't introduce himself to me, left while I was shown my room. The room was paid for by the mage and clearly paid top coin for the suite for me to stay in. There was a large library that was accompanied with a giant copper tub with warm water already in it, and an area to enjoy the sights of Netheria, with a bed made from some sort of fine soft material surrounded by black and blue sheer veils from above I have never come across before. Netheria was gorgeous in the sense that it didn't match what outside the walls looked like at all. The trees weren't covered in parasitic creatures or had a doom-like appearance in the clouds and smelled of clean, soft rain, and filled with chatter from the local tradesmen that lined the streets. All the streets led up to what I would have to assume was the castle that ruled over all of Netheria. It was even taller than the wall and surrounded by 3 inner rings, spewing water from around the area that eventually met the castle's stronghold. Long blue and golden banners waved in the clean air and resembled a great and powerful animal I was not familiar with. Informe found herself on the bed already, still as a cute and cuddly kitten fast asleep, purring ever so slightly. I sat next to her for some time, petting her letting her find her rest and unwind from the long journey we have already traveled. Unstrapping my garments and using some magic to remove my armored dress, I slipped into the hot water, soaking in its healing herbs. Flower pots lined the room, hanging from fixtures, and the smell of scented candles hung flickering while the sun slowly crept behind the horizon. A knock at the door disturbed my peace, and I panicked to find a towel to dry with. When the door opened, I used my arcade to fling a closed Maxian in front of the tub. "I see you found yourself just fine around the room, have you?" the mage said as he grabbed some fruit from the center table. "What do you call your familiar, anyways?" he said with a mouthful of pomegranate seeds and grapes. Jim was still in shock that he didn't even knock before entering and flustering to find an answer for his question. She said with a fluttered voice, you should really knock before entering a lady's room, you know." He laughed at the notion and sat next to Informe, petting her gently, patting her head. She was loving the attention and purred her way into his lap to have more pets. "Her name is Informe, and she's my loyal creation and protector, if necessary," Jim said, still in shock from him making himself comfortable in the room while she was bathing. "Ah, well, that is a very gentle protector you have here," Informe, getting her belly rubbed when he said that. Jim, now gesturing him to give her her clothes on the bed, was getting a little frustrated, and to the fact he has yet to ask her name yet. The clothes, growing impatient of his incompetence, zoomed over to her with her own gesture of arcade, grabbing them and putting them on in a timely fashion. Before coming out behind the Maxian, changed her armor into more of a silken gown, modest and to the color of a royal blue and golden banners that line the area and castle. "Oh, wow, now that is quite a nice color you have picked your clothes to be, and I see that you know quite a few magics of your own," he said, not fully knowing her true potential magical powers. He got up, flopping Informe on the bed as he did, and motioned to the table that was now lined with a cornucopia of foods that she was familiar with, but was excited to try. Jim sat down elegantly, still trying to get used to him being in the room, and started eating while he also found a seat at the table next to her. Their eyes met, and he broke the munching silence with a question. "So what should I call you? I don't think I really want to get used to calling you ma'am, seeing as I usually call my boss that, the queen," he said. She finished chewing and wiped her face clear of any food debris from the fruits and meats. "You may call me Jim." The room fell silent as he raised his eyebrows and then threw an assortment of food on his plate again. He threw a large, huge leg of meat over to Informe that was suspended in the air from his arcane magic and put his napkin back into his lap. "Then I will call you Jim from here on out," he said, still feasting. "How did you obliterate those creatures so easily, if you don't mind me asking, Jim?" Jim, with a mouthful of fruit, just pointed at Informe, which was eating a leg of meat twice the size of her kitten form in the most ungracious way, while he let out a laugh. He wiped his face once more and threw his napkin of royal blue on the plate and motioned it out the door using his magic. "And what do you find so funny, mage of Netheria?" Jim said in a snark tone. "Call me Cornelius. My superiors call me Heinrich, though, and I find it funny that a kitten of this size created such a display of destruction. It must be capable of many transformations, if it's capable, and even able, to cause that much damage with a single strike." Informe, purring herself into a deep sleep again, still loving the rest and attention. Jim let out a laugh, and the two of them exchanged stories for the rest of the night in front of the crackling fireplace, casting their stories as shadows on the walls with their magic. When the night was full and the moons were smiling at each other he made his leave. Jem laid in the bed with Informe, and for once in a very, very long time, she slept with a smile on her face. She woke up in the morning already suited up, awaiting Cornelius in the large dining area that led to the front door of the tavern. The tavern keeper was doing his chores around the area and tending to the other residents that paid for their stay. Informe, now captivated by her new form and the amount of attention it gets her, has been enjoying running around, also curious when our blue-eyed mage will come by to escort us. The front doors open, and there he was. He was now wearing a great suit of armor that left his head revealed, and a cape to match the blue and gold banners around Netheria. On his back was a large book with a sigil that was unfamiliar to Jem, but would soon be learned from her. She would know it. Come, Jem. I want to take you around Netheria and show you to our massive libraries and tradesmen of metals and materials that you might find informative, he said, once again holding his palm out for her to grasp. Jem blushed her way out of her comfortable seat while fidgeting to tighten her armor belts around her shoulders. They left the tavern to the library of great magnitude, where she was allowed to use her arche to read as many books as she wanted. The mage was impressed by her incredible ability to read that many books in such a short amount of time, while he read one of his favorite books in the lobby, waiting for her to finish and read to her fill. The book he read was of a young traveler that fell in love with a widowed woman and sought to fight in her honor against a great beast of destruction. She was enjoying not only getting time to read books that were beyond her parents' writing, but being around others in a place seeking knowledge. Once of her sections was over, the 9 elements of an alchemist. It started out with a plentiful amount of sigil circles and spells, from summoning familiars to even calling upon angels for momentary assistance, and even using plants to combine them in such ways to commune with entities on different planes. I lost my place. Oh, there. She learned that the 9 elements, being light, dark, blood, vita, mortis, fire, water, earth, and air, though as she continued reading, I keep losing my place, I'm sorry, and air, though as she continued reading, there were many pages missing from the book and book numbers. As if it was printed copy was missing vital pages and even chapters that were not included in the book. Looking for the author's name, there was only initials on the very back of the book, H.C.A. She scoured through the books throughout the section, but couldn't find a single book with those same initials. She continued her search throughout the library, and even asking the librarian, an old man with a large beard sitting upon a giant stack of books. And as he looked at her, he started laughing, almost even falling off his empire of knowledge. "Young lady," he cackled, "observe with your heart more than your eyes, and you will see what you seek." He continued writing, who knows what, in his massive book, and ignored her stern looks. She met back up with Cornelius and made their way down the steep stairs to the roads of Netheria, stumped and wanting to know more about this H.C.A. character and what was missing from that book that was so important to keep hidden. After the library, they made their way to one of the trade areas so she could meet up and trade with the locals. The stands seemed to never end, teeming with trades with great supplies from all over Netheria and beyond the northern gates leading to the direction she will inevitably be traveling towards. The locals greeted her with much more kindness than what she is used to, and a smile was starting to become a permanent luxury of her stay there. While stopping at a local eatery, the mage had revealed a lovely dress of the finest quality that Netheria had to offer, and not a type of dress for a typical Netherian resident either. The golden laces on the back shimmered purplescence and reacted to her magic as a display of great beauty. The trim would change colors to her mood, and the sheer around the rim of the dress would change depending on how much joy she was having. He motioned the server to show her to a private room and help her with the dress. Jem was flattered and even excited to try it on. While getting dressed, she was amazed at the reactions the dress had on her and even felt comfortable in its tight appearance. She came back to a surprise of him yanking her towards a group of musicians in the trade center and started dancing joyously, inviting others to join in on the high spirits. They danced through the evening as the floating candles lit the center with great vibrant light lighting their way through the crowds of dancing residents of Netheria. Jem had a fulfilling day with Cornelius and wanted to walk through a reserve that the residents had built to preserve the natural beauty of the area before returning to the tavern. It was a small park that was lined with a brick path with a tall white gazebo in the middle, with a swing that would swing over the waterfront covered with friendly white and blue birds native to the lands, lit brilliantly by candles. They made their way back to the tavern before nightfall and told tales of far and old to each other. Jem brought up the book that she found and was telling him about the information in the book and how odd it was that there was so much missing from its wealth of knowledge. He choked a little and explained to her that the book she found was one of the books that the Mages Guild teaches their beginner mages as they go through a rigorous and even deathly training behind the safety of the castle's walls. He further explained that he was one of the first waves to make it through the trainings of Merlin, a mage of great stature to the lands of Netheria, but didn't elaborate on his learnings. He became quiet and somber until Informe jumped on his lap, breaking the darkly tone of his silence. Informe and him were quite a duo and even sometimes seemed to be made for each other in the way that they acted. He fed her table scraps so much that it seemed like she was starting to gain weight since their stay there. Many days went on like this, where they would travel abroad around the lands of Netheria, always making a stop at the library so Jem could harass the librarian about this archaic poem he left her with, and each day that she was asked, he would laugh at her and simply say in a raspy voice, "I see you still haven't opened your eyes yet," leaving her with more and more curiosity. She would eventually read everything there was there to know about the history and lore of Netheria, even reaching the ends of that book's teachings. She contemplated wanting to join their guild, but was afraid that it would distract her main mission up through the northern mountains, another cycle's journey. Each night, they would tell each other stories they read in the library and books they have read along their journeys. But as one night was ending, a terrible sound screeched in the distance of the land that shook the lands of Netheria, making some of the buildings crumble into piles of dust. Jem and Cornelius sat up startled and looked outside but couldn't believe their eyes. Excuse me. Cornelius held Jem's hand firmly, readying his battle book, summoning his armor and weapon to his side. She turned to him and asked what that noise was, but as the words left her mouth, his helmet slammed shut on his face, completing his armor. "Jem, I haven't told you everything yet, but I will soon. I have to travel to the southern gates to aid the soldiers' fight. There's something terrible coming, and it's my duty to protect these lands at any means necessary." Jem, startled by the instant bright blue light as he teleported away, leaving her wondering. What was that sound, and what was he not telling me about? With the snap of her finger, her black cloak was on, all while Informe was getting herself ready for battle as well. She summoned her chalice and staff in hand, ready to help as much as she could. Her and Informe made it to the insides of the gate, blending in as much as possible, with the great amounts of soldiers accompanied with one mage per group of soldiers. As her sight narrowed, she saw Cornelius at the very front of the grand army with a great large flag about to rally his troops. "Tonight, we defend Mother Netheria, the land of unity and freedom from the great black death of these lands once more. Do not fear, as he will feed from you and drain your vita. Mages, protect your group and prepare themselves for battle." The men all clashed their spears and swords to their shields, ready for what seemed like a war followed by war chants. Jim, in the far back of the army, started to become worried, but not for herself, for Cornelius, and sought to protect him as much as possible. She gave Informe permission to go all out, leaving her with a great, gnarly grin on her face, as she knew exactly what Jim meant. The gates opened, and as they did, they revealed an even greater army just outside the gates, with a beast of enormous size, shedding a deathly black aura, with great big red eyes behind the masses of beasts of the land. It was a dragon. That will conclude Grimm and Jim the Awakening, my first book. I know I leave it on a cliffhanger, and you will just have to find out what happens in my second book. It has been a huge pleasure to put all of this together, and even though I'm still going through copyright and some formatting things for my ebook and hardcover, it will be coming out soon, and I will be sure to leave a notification on for whomever is subscribed. So make sure you hit the subscribe with all notifications on, and leave a like, leave a comment. I know I left you on a cliffhanger, but let me know what you think's going to happen after this. Again, guys, it has been a huge pleasure, and I will catch you in my second book in the series Grimm and Jim. I'm your host and author, Connor Barvet. Thanks, guys. We'll see ya.